The wet pavement outside my house reflected the flashing blue lights of a police cruiser, but the silence inside was far louder. A heavy man in a dark trench coat stood in my hallway, dripping rainwater onto my floor as he handed me a thick envelope. My hands trembled against the seal. DuPage County Circuit Court, emergency petition for conservatorship. Across the table, my husband, Brian, didn't look up from his iPad, his face emotionless while his mother calmly sipped her chamomile tea. "You should have signed the trust papers when I asked nicely." "Hannah," Brian said, his voice cold and razor-sharp. "Now the judge will decide if you're even sane enough to keep your own mother's house." The room smelled of wet wool, bitter tea, and my own panic. To understand how my 19-year marriage collapsed into a courtroom ambush on a rainy Tuesday, I have to take you back to where the trap was set. That Tuesday started like every exhausting day in my life as a home health nurse. The antiseptic stench of bleach clung to my uniform. My back throbbed after a 14-hour shift lifting a Parkinson's patient. My fingers were raw from scrubbing them 50 times a day. When I unlocked my door at 7:30, rain sloshed against the glass. "I'm home," I called softly. No one answered. In the dining room, silence was a physical weight. Brian sat at the mahogany table, swiping his tablet. Across from him sat his mother, Eleanor, her knitting needles clacking like tiny bone teeth. Neither looked at me. "I made chicken soup this morning," I murmured. "Did you eat?" Eleanor didn't pause. "The broth was completely bland, Hannah. You're getting careless." Brian said nothing. He treated me like a ghost, a servant who cooked, cleaned, and paid bills. For 19 years, I believed if I worked harder, warmth would return to his eyes. I was wrong. Brian set his iPad down with a thud. He slid a royal blue folder across the table. "Sign it." "What is this?" "The Miller Family Trust Agreement," Brian replied. "It transfers ownership of your mother's lakefront house in Lake Geneva and her $250,000 insurance payout into the trust." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. My mother had passed away 3 weeks prior. That cottage was filled with the scent of pine needles, old books, and her love. Why would I put my mother's home into a trust? She left it specifically to me. Brian's eyes narrowed into icy slits. "Because you are in no condition to manage real estate. You work brutal night shifts. Your memory is slipping. Last month you left the oven on, and 2 weeks ago you couldn't find your car in the parking garage." I was exhausted after a 24-hour shift. I snapped. "The garage has 6 floors and 3,000 cars. You're emotional. You're unstable," Brian interrupted with fake concern. "Eleanor agrees. The trust places me as sole trustee to protect you and Leo from your poor judgment." Eleanor nodded. "He's right, dear. A woman in your fragile state shouldn't be burdened with heavy financial decisions." They sat together, a united front. They expected me to bow my head and sign, just as I had done for 19 years. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at my husband, the man whose college debts I helped pay, whose household I ran on my nursing salary while he hoarded his income. Sharp clarity cut through my exhaustion. I stood up straight. "No." Brian froze. "What?" I said no. "This is my mother's legacy. I will not sign it over to you. Not today. Not ever." Brian's face flushed red. Before he could speak, the shrill chime of the doorbell shattered the room. I walked to the foyer. Through the glass, I saw a tall silhouette in the rain. I pulled the door open. Cold wind blasted inside. On my porch stood a man in a dripping raincoat, holding a waterproof envelope. "Hannah Miller." "Yes. I am a process server for DuPage County. You have been officially served." He turned away. I stood in the hallway, hands trembling as I tore open the seal. Bold letters burned into my retinas. in the Circuit Court of the 18th Judicial Circuit, DuPage County, Illinois, in re the estate of Hannah Miller, an alleged incapacitated adult. Petition for emergency conservatorship of person and estate. My breath hitched. The red filing date read, October 12th, 6 days ago, 6 days before this dinner, 6 days before Brian offered me a choice. A footstep sounded behind me. Brian stood at the hallway's end, watching me read. The fake concern was gone. You filed this last week, I whispered. You brought paperwork to dinner pretending you wanted my agreement, but you already dragged me to court 6 days ago. Brian didn't flinch. Dinner was your last chance to do this the easy way. Since you refused, a judge will decide if you have the mental capacity to run your life. You have 3 weeks until the hearing. He walked away. I stood alone in the drafty foyer, holding the court summons against my chest. My marriage was over. As I stared at my reflection in the dark window, my paralyzing fear burned away, leaving behind a cold, unyielding resolve. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to fight. The rain outside my bedroom window fell in heavy sheets, drumming a dull rhythm against the glass. It was 2 a.m, but sleep was impossible. I sat at my wooden desk, wrapped in a fleece blanket, with my old leather journals spread open before me. For 19 years, I had kept a meticulous log of my life. Pages of faded ink recorded every shift, every quiet night, and every minor mistake I had ever made. I flipped back through the entries, searching for the evidence Brian claimed to hold against me. There it was. 3 months ago, left the oven on low after a 24-hour double shift at the clinic. I remembered that night. I had worked 14 hours with a dying hospice patient, followed immediately by a 6-hour emergency coverage shift. I had stumbled home at 4 a.m, my feet swollen and eyes burning. I flipped another page. 2 months ago, could not find my blue sedan in the hospital parking garage. Used key fob alarm to track it down on floor 4. A bitter coldness settled in my chest. The garage had 6 massive levels and 3,000 identical vehicles. Every nurse on my floor had used their panic button after a grueling night shift. These were not symptoms of dementia. These were physical marks of sheer exhaustion. I had been working to the bone to pay our mortgage, while Brian quietly gathered my fatigue, twisting it into proof that I was losing my mind. I was not losing my memory. I was being hunted. At 9 o'clock the following morning, I stood outside a stone building in downtown Chicago. The crisp October air smelled of wet asphalt, fallen oak leaves, and exhaust fumes. I pushed open the brass doors and rode the elevator to the 12th floor. The brass plaque on the mahogany door read, Rachel Ross, family law attorney. Rachel Ross sat behind a large glass desk littered with legal briefs. She wore a charcoal blazer, her dark hair pinned neatly back, her pale blue eyes possessing a razor-like focus. She listened in absolute silence as I laid out my story, handing her the blue folder and court summons. Rachel read the petition line by line. Her gold pen made swift notes in the margins. On the 3rd page, she stopped, her eyebrows pulled together in a tight, furious line. Where did your husband get these clinical progress notes, Hannah? Rachel asked, her voice dead serious. What do you mean? Rachel pointed at a paragraph. This is an internal occupational health report from your hospital. It details an incident 3 months ago where you complained of mild dizziness and requested a short rest. I was starting a new blood pressure medication. I stammered. It made me lightheaded for 20 minutes. The doctor adjusted my dosage, and I felt fine the next day. Did you give Brian permission to access your private occupational health records? Rachel demanded. No, of course not, I said, shaking my head. I didn't even know those notes existed. Rachel leaned back, a cold smile touching her lips. This is a massive violation of HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Your husband used a personal connection with a clinic administrator to illegally extract your private medical data. He committed a federal privacy breach to build this petition. She set the papers down, looking at me with unwavering clarity. "Listen to me carefully," Rachel said, her voice cutting like a scalpel. "Your husband is not afraid that you are losing your mind. He is terrified that you are waking up, finding your voice, and realizing the true value of your mother's lakefront property." Those words shattered the last remnants of my self-doubt. "Now," Rachel continued, pulling a blank legal pad forward, "we need to conduct a full audit of your life. I want every bank statement, tax return, canceled check, and receipt from the last 19 years. For 3 days, I lived in a mountain of paper. I sat on my bedroom floor late into the night while Brian and Eleanor ignored me below. I sorted through 19 years of bank records, my fingers stained with black ink. When Rachel and I totaled the numbers on Friday afternoon, the truth was staggering. Over 19 years, my nursing salary had generated over $350,000 in net income. Every penny had gone directly into our joint checking account, paying for groceries, utility bills, house repairs, and our son Leo's college tuition. Brian's high salary as a logistics manager had quietly flowed into his private, individual investment accounts. He had built his personal wealth on my back while I paid for his everyday life. "He used you as his personal bank account," Rachel stated plainly, highlighting the grand total of $350,210 in bright yellow. "He let you pay for everything so he could hoard his wealth. And now that you've inherited prime real estate, he wants to take that too." The shame that had weighed me down for years evaporated, replaced by white-hot anger. I had not been a burden. I had been the foundation of this family. "What is our next step?" I asked, my voice steady. "2 things," Rachel said. "First, we file a formal HIPAA violation complaint against Brian and the clinic. Second, you take an independent, comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation at Loyola Medicine." On Monday morning, I sat in a brightly lit medical office at Loyola Medicine in Chicago. The room smelled of clean linen and fresh paint. Dr. Eris Thorne, a renowned neuropsychologist with silver hair, sat across from me. For 2 hours, Dr. Thorne put me through a battery of cognitive tests. I recalled long strings of numbers, solved spatial puzzles, identified intricate patterns, and remembered lists of 20 obscure words. It was exhausting, but with every test, the cloud in my head lifted. My mind worked with speed and absolute clarity. When the final test ended, Dr. Thorne placed his pen down. "Mrs. Miller," he said softly, a genuine smile breaking across his face, "your cognitive processing speed is in the 95th percentile. Your memory retention is exceptional. You do not have dementia. You are simply suffering from severe physical fatigue caused by chronic overwork." He signed the evaluation report with a black fountain pen and handed me a copy. Bold black letters at the top read, "Cognitive evaluation, 100% mental capacity and functional fitness." I walked out of the medical center onto the busy sidewalk. A chilly autumn rain was falling, splashing against my face. I stood under the gray sky, clutching the report tightly against my chest. The rain washed away 19 years of gaslighting. I looked at my reflection in a glass door. My eyes were clear. My shoulders were square. My mind was sharp. I was not losing my mind. I was not helpless. The trap had been set, but for the first time, I possessed the strength and the proof to tear it apart. Answering the query by executing the text generation directly and ensuring constraints are met. The silence inside our Naperville home became an active weapon. Brian and Eleanor no longer ignored me out of indifference. They isolated me with calculated intent. They cooked their own dinners, leaving the stove cold and dark when I arrived home from my shifts. They locked their bedroom doors when I walked down the hall. Whispers stopped the moment I entered a room, replaced by pointed, heavy glares. I refused to let their Cold War suffocate me. I stopped trying to fix their meals. I stopped trying to warm the ice. I bought my own groceries, storing them on a single shelf in the refrigerator, and cooked simple, nourishing meals for myself after work. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, my 19-year-old son, Leo, came home from college for the weekend. He dropped his heavy canvas duffel bag on the entryway floor with a dull thud. He didn't hug me. He barely looked at my face. "Mom," Leo said, his voice laced with annoyance as he walked into the kitchen. My Venmo request for my $500 weekly allowance bounced. "I need you to transfer the cash right now. My fraternity dues are due tomorrow." I looked at my son. He had Brian's tall frame and sharp jawline, but his eyes held the spoiled impatience of someone who had never seen a bill in his life. For 19 years, I had quietly deposited money into his account whenever he asked, shielding him from every financial reality. I opened my leather purse, pulled out a neat paper folder, and set it on the kitchen island between us. "Leo," I said, my voice calm and even, "I paid your fall semester tuition statement of $12,000 last month. I also paid your campus housing and your meal plan." Leo scoffed, rolling his eyes. "So, that's what parents do. Just send the $500. "I am no longer giving you an allowance, Leo," I stated plainly, looking him dead in the eye. "My obligation to raise an adult is complete. If you need spending money for fraternity dues or social events, you can apply for a campus job at the student union." Leo stared at me, his mouth agape in disbelief. His face flushed with anger. "Are you serious? Dad was right. You really are losing your mind. You're turning crazy and selfish." The insult stung, but it didn't break me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. "I am not crazy, Leo," I replied softly, my tone rock solid. "And I am done funding your disrespect. You are 19 years old. It is time for you to learn the value of $1. He slammed his hand on the counter, grabbed his duffel bag, and stormed upstairs to his father's home office. I stood in the quiet kitchen, my chest rising and falling slowly. The habit of overparenting was broken. That evening marked the start of my transformation. I was done living like a weary victim in my own skin. I booked an appointment at a salon in downtown Naperville. The sharp smell of hair dye and lavender shampoo filled the air as the stylist cut away 8 inches of my long, frayed, exhausted hair. I looked in the mirror as my new reflection emerged, a sharp, modern bob that framed my face, highlighting my cheekbones and clear, resolute eyes. Next, I walked into a department store on Main Street. I bought 2 tailored navy blazers, crisp white cotton shirts, and comfortable professional leather heels. I threw away my faded, oversized scrubs and replaced them with clothes that demanded respect. Every morning at 6 o'clock, before the sun rose, I laced up a pair of new running shoes and stepped into the crisp autumn air. The cold wind bit my cheeks as my feet rhythmically pounded the damp pavement along the Naperville Riverwalk. My lungs burned, my legs throbbed, but with every mile I ran, the physical weakness left my body. I was building endurance for the battle ahead. Every evening, after my home health shifts, I sat at my desk with a desk lamp illuminating my textbooks. I had enrolled in an online evening certificate program at the University of Illinois, private healthcare management and practice administration. I spent hours studying healthcare law, medical billing, business operations, and patient advocacy. My mind absorbed the information like a sponge. On Wednesdays, as part of my clinical credit, I volunteered at a local physical therapy clinic in Naperville. The clinic smelled of clean eucalyptus oil and fresh towels. That was where I met Julian Vance. Julian was a 46-year-old physical therapist and widower. He had kind, crinkling eyes behind thin wireframe glasses, silver-dusted hair, and broad, capable shoulders. I watched him work with a stroke patient, guiding the elderly man's leg with immense patience and gentle encouragement. When Julian noticed me adjusting a patient's leg brace, he walked over. His presence was calm, warm, and entirely grounded. "You have very gentle hands," Julian said softly, his voice rich and genuine. "And incredible technique. You're a nurse, aren't you?" "Home health care," I replied, offering a modest smile. 14 years. Julian nodded with deep respect. "That is hard, noble work, Hannah. It takes a very strong person to give that much care to others every single day." His words struck a chord deep inside my chest. He didn't look at me with pity. He didn't treat me like an invalid. He saw my skill, my strength, and my worth. Over the next 3 weeks, our brief conversations over coffee in the clinic break room became a quiet sanctuary, a reminder of what healthy, respectful human connection felt like. By the end of October, the night before our court hearing arrived, I stood in the upstairs hallway, wearing my new tailored navy trousers and a crisp white shirt. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the furnace. Brian stepped out of his home office. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes scanning my short hair, my sharp outfit, and my upright posture. For a fraction of a second, hesitation flickered across his icy features. He quickly masked it, stepping close to me in the narrow corridor. His shadow blocked the hallway light, his scent of heavy cologne and stale coffee filling the air. "Look at you," Brian sneered, dropping his voice into a low, threatening hiss. "Playing dress-up won't save you tomorrow. Hannah, you think a short haircut makes you competent? If you walk into that courtroom tomorrow morning, you will lose everything. You will lose your reputation, your home, and your son. I will make sure Leo never speaks to you again." 19 years ago, those words would have brought me to my knees, sobbing and begging for forgiveness. Now, I didn't step back. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, looking directly into his cold, dark eyes. A calm, genuine smile touched my lips. "You're wrong, Brian," I said quietly, my voice steady as a heartbeat. "I am walking into that courtroom tomorrow to reclaim what you stole from me 19 years ago. I am taking back my freedom." Brian blinked, his jaw clenching tightly as he struggled to find a response. I turned on my heel and walked down the stairs, leaving him standing alone in the dark corridor. The DuPage County Judicial Center smelled of old floor wax, damp wool coats, and stale espresso. Sunlight filtered through high, arched windows, casting cold, geometric shadows across the polished oak benches. The silence in courtroom 302 was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the dull click of mechanical pencils and the soft rustle of legal briefs. I sat at the defense table in my tailored navy blazer, my hands resting flat on the cool wood. Beside me, Rachel Ross adjusted her dark blazer, her gold pen hovering over a yellow legal pad like a drawn sword. Across the aisle, Brian sat with his attorney. He wore his sharpest gray suit, his hair neatly combed, his face practicing an expression of quiet, sorrowful concern. Beside him, Eleanor sat in a stiff black dress, dabbing her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief for the benefit of the gallery. At exactly 9 o'clock, the side door opened. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Ella Mercer." The bailiff barked. Judge Mercer was a woman in her late 50s with sharp gray eyes, dark-rimmed glasses, and a silver hair bun secured with a silver pin. She took her seat behind the high mahogany bench, her black robe billowing behind her. She did not smile. She opened the thick leather file before her, her eyes scanning the pages with practiced, terrifying speed. "We are here in the matter of the estate of Hannah Miller, an alleged incapacitated adult," Judge Mercer announced, her voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room. "Counsel, present your arguments." Brian's attorney, a tall, slick man named Marcus Vance, stood up first. He buttoned his jacket, adjusted his silk tie, and walked toward the center podium with smooth, practiced confidence. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice dripping with practiced warmth and artificial grief. "This is a tragic case of a loving family forced to step in before disaster strikes. Hannah Miller is 44 years old, but the brutal toll of her work has shattered her mental capacity. She works grueling night shifts as a nurse. The physical and emotional fatigue has triggered severe cognitive decline." Vance turned toward the gallery, holding up a stack of paper exhibits. "We have documented clear patterns of erratic behavior," Vance continued, his voice rising for dramatic effect. 3 months ago, Mrs. Miller left a gas oven burning for hours, endangering her home. 2 months ago, she suffered a complete disorientation in a hospital parking garage, wandering aimlessly because she could not recognize her own vehicle. She has missed family obligations, exhibited severe emotional mood swings, and recently engaged in wild, impulsive spending, purchasing a $1,500 silver bracelet despite her family's tightening budget. Vance stepped closer to the bench, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "Just 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Miller inherited a valuable lakefront property and a $250,000 insurance payout from her late mother," Vance said, shaking his head sorrowfully. "In her current fragile, confused state, she is highly vulnerable to financial exploitation. Her husband, Brian Miller, is simply asking this court for emergency conservatorship to protect his wife from her own mental decline." Vance sat down, looking thoroughly pleased with himself. Across the aisle, Brian offered his attorney a subtle, triumphant nod. Judge Mercer tapped her gold pen on the bench. "Mrs. Ross, your response?" Rachel stood up smoothly. She did not pace. She did not raise her voice. She walked to the podium with absolute, unwavering composure. "Your Honor," Rachel said, her voice cutting through the heavy courtroom air like a razor. "Growing older or working hard does not make a person incapacitated. It simply makes them tired. The petitioner has presented a fantasy constructed from twisted half-truths. I would like to call my client, Hannah Miller, to the stand." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I did not tremble. I stood up, smoothed my blazer, and walked to the witness box. I raised my right hand, swore the oath, and sat down on the wooden chair. Judge Mercer leaned forward over her glasses, looking directly at me. Her sharp gray eyes searched my face. "Mrs. Miller," Judge Mercer said calmly, "can you address the allegations presented by your husband's counsel regarding your memory and behavior?" I took a slow, deep breath. The scent of polished wood and cold air filled my lungs. I looked past Brian, past Eleanor, directly into the eyes of the judge. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear, steady, and resonant. "I am 44 years old. For 14 years, I have worked as a home health care nurse, lifting bedridden patients, administering medications, and keeping human beings alive through 14-hour night shifts. 3 months ago, I left a gas stove burner on low after working 24 hours straight covering double shifts. 2 months ago, I used my key fob alarm to locate my car in Edward Hospital's 6-story parking garage, a facility with 3,000 identical vehicles, after a brutal shift saving a dying patient. If using a key fob to find a car after a 24-hour shift in a massive garage is legal proof of dementia, Your Honor, then half the doctors and nurses working in the intensive care units across DuPage County should be stripped of their civil rights today. A quiet rustle swept through the gallery. Someone near the back row let out a soft, chuckling cough. Judge Mercer's lips twitched upward for a fraction of a second before her face returned to stone. "And what about the $1,500 silver bracelet, Mrs. Miller?" Judge Mercer asked. "I bought that bracelet with my own earned income, Your Honor," I replied, pulling my shoulders back. "I worked 19 years paying off my husband's student loans, paying for our groceries, and funding our son's college tuition, while my husband kept his high salary in private accounts. I bought that bracelet to remind myself that after 19 years of being treated like an invisible servant in my own home, I am still a human being worth celebrating." Silence descended upon the courtroom. Brian's face flushed a deep, ugly red. His jaw clenched so hard his cheek muscles twitched. Rachel stepped forward, placing a heavy binder onto the evidence table. "Your Honor," Rachel announced loudly, "we have 4 critical exhibits to submit into evidence." Rachel walked to the clerk's desk, handing over the documents one by one. "Exhibit A," Rachel stated, her voice booming through the room. "An independent, comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Eris Thorne at Loyola Medicine. The report confirms Mrs. Miller possesses a 95th percentile cognitive processing speed and 100% mental functional capacity. There is 0 evidence of dementia or cognitive decline." Rachel pointed a finger directly at Brian. "Exhibit B," Rachel continued sharply, "a formal federal complaint for HIPAA violations. Mr. Miller used an unauthorized personal connection at Mrs. Miller's clinic to illegally extract her private occupational health records without her knowledge or consent. He committed a federal privacy crime to build this false petition." Brian winced, his attorney frantically leaning over to whisper in his ear. "Exhibit C," Rachel roared, projecting a spreadsheet onto the courtroom monitors. "A 19-year forensic financial audit. Mrs. Miller contributed $350,000 of her nursing income directly into joint household accounts, covering all living expenses and college tuition. Meanwhile, Mr. Miller funneled his entire logistics manager salary into private, individual investment accounts. Mrs. Miller was not a financial liability. She was the sole financial backbone of the household." Rachel held up the final document. "And Exhibit D," Rachel concluded softly, "a pre-drafted educational trust and prenuptial agreement created by Mrs. Miller for her son, Leo. This agreement locks her inherited lakefront house into a protective trust exclusively for her son's future education, while waiving any marital claims to Mr. Miller's assets. This demonstrates flawless, highly competent financial foresight." Judge Mercer looked down at the documents. She read Dr. Thorne's report. She examined the HIPAA complaint. She studied the financial spreadsheet. Her face grew darker with every passing second. She slammed the file shut. The loud crack echoed like a gunshot through the silent courtroom. "This court finds 0 evidence that Mrs. Hannah Miller lacks the mental capacity to manage her personal or financial affairs," Judge Mercer declared, her voice cold as steel. "The allegations presented in this petition are baseless, malicious, and built upon illegally obtained medical records." Judge Mercer fixed her piercing gaze directly on Brian and his attorney. "The petition for emergency conservatorship is denied with prejudice," Judge Mercer ruled, striking her wooden gavel down with a heavy thud. "Furthermore, the petitioner, Brian Miller, is ordered to pay all of Mrs. Miller's legal fees and faces formal court referral for HIPAA privacy violations. Court is adjourned." The gavel strike shattered my 19-year nightmare. I closed my eyes as a wave of overwhelming relief washed over me. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I simply breathed in the cool air, feeling my chest expand with absolute freedom. I gathered my files and walked out of the courtroom beside Rachel. As we reached the wide marble corridor outside, heavy footsteps pounded behind us. "Hannah, wait!" Brian yelled. I stopped and turned around slowly. Brian stood before me, his sharp gray suit rumpled, his face pale, his eyes wide with desperate, unvarnished panic. "Hannah, please," Brian stammered, reaching out a trembling hand to grab my arm. "We can talk about this. We're family. Don't do this to me." Before his fingers could touch my blazer, Julian Vance stepped forward from the gallery hallway. Julian stood calmly beside me, his broad shoulders forming a solid, immovable wall between Brian and me. I looked at Brian's outstretched hand. Then I looked into his eyes. There was no anger left in me, no fear, no hatred, only the cold, quiet distance of a woman who had finally outgrown her prison. I gently took a step back, pulling myself completely out of his reach. "Do not touch me, Brian," I said quietly, my voice smooth and unbreakable. "We are not family anymore. My lawyer will deliver the divorce papers to your office tomorrow." I turned my back on his stunned, silent face. With Rachel on my left and Julian on my right, I walked down the long marble hallway toward the heavy glass doors leading out into the crisp autumn sunlight. The crisp November wind blew across the sparkling water of Lake Geneva, carrying the sharp scent of damp pine needles and fresh cedar. My mother's cottage sat quietly on the shore, its weathered dark with shingles gleaming under the pale autumn sun. 4 months had passed since Judge Mercer dismissed Brian's petition. I had officially filed for divorce, packed my belongings, and moved into the cottage permanently. The old rooms no longer felt heavy with grief. They smelled of white paint, lavender soap, and fresh coffee. I sat at a rustic oak desk in my new sunroom, looking out at the lake. A brass plaque beside the front door read, "Hannah's Private Home Care, LLC." Completing my management certification had transformed my life. I was no longer working 14-hour night shifts for a hospital system that treated me like a machine. I had launched my own independent practice, offering specialized, compassionate home nursing to local seniors. I managed my own schedule, set my own rates, and selected my own clients. For the first time in my career, my work brought me profound peace instead of physical collapse. The quiet hum of my phone broke the silence. The screen displayed Brian's name. A year ago, my heart would have leapt into my throat with terror. Now I felt nothing, only a cool, detached calm. I pressed answer and placed the phone to my ear. "Hannah," Brian said. His voice sounded small, raspy, and tired. The booming confidence he once used to make me feel small was entirely gone. "Hello, Brian," I replied smoothly. "I'm calling about my car," Brian stammered, clearing his throat nervously. "The transmission died yesterday on Highway 59. The repair shop quoted me $3,500. The court fees from the hearing wiped out my liquid accounts, and my company cut my quarterly bonus after the HIPAA scandal." He paused, waiting for the familiar reaction. For 19 years, whenever Brian faced a financial bump, I had immediately opened my checkbook to fix it. "That sounds difficult, Brian," I said softly. "Can you loan me the $3,500? Brian asked, his tone dropping into a pathetic, desperate whine. "I can't get to work without the car. Hannah, please. You have your mother's insurance money." I closed my eyes and took a slow, deep breath of the pine-scented air. The old urge to rescue him, to keep the peace, flared up for a fraction of a second, then died away completely. "No, Brian," I stated plainly, my voice as steady as a rock. "I will not loan you the money." Silence stretched across the line. "Hannah, please," Brian pleaded. "We were married for 19 years. And during those 19 years, I paid for everything while you hoarded your salary." I reminded him, without anger or bitterness. "I can recommend an affordable mechanic in Naperville if you need a second opinion, but I will not pay a single dollar for your financial missteps. You are 46 years old, Brian. Carry your own weight." I ended the call and placed the phone on the desk. A deep sense of liberation settled into my chest. Setting a hard boundary did not make me cruel. It made me free. 2 days later, on a chilly Saturday afternoon, a navy blue sedan pulled into the gravel driveway. My 19-year-old son, Leo, stepped out of the car. He wore a heavy wool jacket and carried a textbook under his arm. He walked up the wooden porch steps and knocked gently on the door. I opened the door and smiled. "Hello, Leo." Leo stepped inside, taking off his wet boots. He looked around the bright room, his expression hesitant and uncertain. "Mom," Leo began, rubbing the back of his neck. "Dad called me yesterday. He was crying. He said you refused to help him with his car. He said you've become cold and heartless." I didn't yell. I didn't get defensive. I walked to my desk, picked up a neat folder, and handed it to him. "Look inside, Leo," I said calmly. Leo opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the forensic financial audit from our trial, highlighting the $350,000 I had contributed to the household, alongside his college tuition receipts. On top of the papers sat a new document, the Miller Educational Trust Agreement. "Read the trust terms, Leo," I instructed softly. Leo scanned the pages. His eyes widened as he read the conditions I had set for his inheritance. "I love you, Leo," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "My mother left this lake house to me, and I am locking it into a trust for your future home and graduate school. But this inheritance is a gift, not a safety net for laziness. You will receive these funds only if you complete a course in personal financial management and work 20 hours a week at a campus job." Leo stared at the document, then looked at me. The entitlement that Brian had cultivated in him for years suddenly cracked open. "I paid your full tuition, Leo," I continued gently. "I gave you a home, but I am done funding disrespect. Your father treats money like something he is owed by others. I am teaching you how to be an adult." Tears welled up in Leo's eyes. He set the folder down, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry, Mom," Leo whispered, his voice cracking. "I was so selfish. I listened to Dad because it was easy. I took everything you did for granted." I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around my son. He hugged me tightly, burying his face against my shoulder, sobbing quietly. The wall of entitlement between us shattered, replaced by genuine love and newfound respect. 3 weeks later, Leo took a part-time job as a receptionist at Julian Vance's physical therapy clinic, earning his own spending money for the first time in his life. Late one Saturday afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the tree line, I heard the crunch of gravel outside. I looked through the kitchen window. Brian's old loaner car was parked near the road. Brian stepped out, wearing an old jacket. He carried a heavy wooden toolbox in his hands. He walked toward the edge of my property, where an old wooden fence post had rotted and collapsed near the water. He did not walk up to the house. He did not knock on the door. He knelt in the damp grass, pulled out a hammer and fresh cedar boards, and began quietly repairing the fence. I stood by the window, watching him work in the fading autumn light. His shoulders were hunched. The arrogance was gone. He worked in complete silence, nailing the fresh wood into place. Julian Vance walked into the kitchen, carrying 2 mugs of hot cider. He set one mug on the counter beside me and looked out the window. "Do you want me to ask him to leave?" Julian asked softly, his voice warm and respectful. I looked at Brian, then turned to Julian, offering a peaceful, genuine smile. "No," I replied, taking a sip of the warm, spiced cider. "Let him fix the fence. He needs to learn how to repair things he broke." I stepped away from the window, turning my back on the shadow of my past, and walked toward the living room, where warmth, light, and my new life waited. The late afternoon sun hung low over Lake Geneva, casting a blanket of warm, liquid gold across the quiet water. A gentle breeze blew from the west, carrying the sweet, earthy scent of damp fallen leaves, crisp pine, and the clean chill of early winter. I stood at the end of the long wooden dock behind my mother's cottage. The calm water rhythmically lapped against the weathered cedar posts beneath my feet with a soft, soothing splash. I wore an elegant beige, wool-knit dress and a soft cream cashmere scarf wrapped around my neck. The cool wind ruffled my short, sharp bob, but I didn't shiver. I looked out across the shimmering expanse of the lake. 19 years of cold silence, exhaustion, and invisible servitude felt like a distant shore I had crossed long ago. The shame that once crushed my chest was gone. The constant, frantic urge to fix everything and save everyone had dissolved into complete inner peace. I had not just survived the storm. I had rebuilt my entire life from the ground up. Behind me, the gravel driveway crunched softly under car tires. A familiar silver sedan came to a stop near the garage. I didn't tense up. My pulse remained slow, steady, and calm. I turned around gently. Brian stepped out of the car. He wore a simple dark wool coat and blue jeans. The arrogant, calculating posture that had defined him for nearly 2 decades was completely gone. His shoulders rested lower, curved with quiet humility. His hair was streaked with fresh silver at the temples, and deep lines of reflection were etched around his eyes. He held a warm porcelain mug in his hand, steam curling slowly into the crisp air. He walked down the wooden dock, his steps slow and hesitant, keeping a respectful distance of 3 feet between us. He offered the mug to me. "I brought you some hot peppermint tea, Hannah," Brian said softly, his voice low, clear, and devoid of any manipulative edge. "I remembered you used to like it when the weather turned cold." I looked at the mug, then looked at his face. I reached out and accepted the warm ceramic. The heat radiated through my leather gloves, smelling faintly of mint and fresh steam. "Thank you, Brian," I replied smoothly, my voice clear and light as the breeze. Brian looked out at the golden water, taking a slow, deep breath. "I finished the fence this afternoon," Brian said quietly. "I replaced the rotted cedar posts and secured the latch. It should hold up through the winter storms." "I saw," I said. "You did a very thorough job." Brian swallowed hard, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. He turned to face me directly. There was no defense attorney beside him, no mother whispering in his ear, no legal strategy in his pocket. Just a man facing the wreckage of his own choices. "I saw my counselor again on Tuesday," Brian admitted, his voice raspy with raw honesty. "She asked me why I spent 19 years measuring your worth by what you could give me instead of who you were." He paused, looking down at his worn, leather shoes before meeting my eyes again. "I didn't know how to answer her, Hannah," Brian confessed, his voice cracking slightly. "I convinced myself that taking care of the money was my duty, but the truth is, I was greedy, entitled, and blind. I took your strength, your nursing salary, and your gentle heart completely for granted. I treated your sacrifices like something I was owed." He took a shaky breath, stepping back another inch. "I am so deeply sorry for what I put you through," Brian said, 2 clear tears slipping down his cheeks. "I don't expect you to take me back. I know I lost that right the day I dragged you to court. I just needed you to hear me say it without any excuses." I looked at my ex-husband. For years, I had dreamed of hearing those words. I had thought those words would be the key to my healing. But standing there on the wooden dock, wrapped in the warmth of my own independence, I realized something profound. My healing had never depended on his apology. My freedom had begun the moment I stopped waiting for him to value me. A soft, genuine smile touched my lips. I accepted your apology a long time ago, Brian. I said softly, my voice completely free of anger, bitterness, or malice. Not because what you did was okay, but because I refused to carry your shadow into my future. I forgive you, and I wish you peace. Brian blinked, fresh tears falling. He offered a small, grateful nod. Thank you, Hannah. Leo is inside, I added gently. He just finished his online finance assignment. He'd like to have dinner with you before he heads back to campus. A flicker of genuine relief washed across Brian's face. I'd like that very much. He turned and walked back up the lawn toward the cottage. As he reached the porch, Leo opened the door. My son stepped out, his posture tall, confident, and mature. Leo greeted his father with a firm, respectful handshake and a warm pat on the shoulder. They walked inside together, the warm yellow light from the kitchen window welcoming them in. The cycle of entitlement was broken. My son was growing into an honorable, self-reliant man. A soft footstep sounded behind me on the dock. Julian Vance walked up, wearing a dark navy coat. He didn't interrupt my solitude. He simply stood beside me, his broad shoulder lightly brushing against mine, offering a solid, grounding presence. He held 2 small paper bags filled with warm cinnamon donuts from the local bakery. Everything all right? Julian asked gently, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. Everything is wonderful, I replied, taking a sip of the peppermint tea. Julian smiled, reaching out to wrap his warm, strong hand over mine. His grip was gentle, respectful, and comforting. There was no control in his touch, no demands, only quiet mutual affection and deep admiration. I turned back toward the open lake. The sun sank beneath the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant ribbons of violet, rose, and brilliant gold. The golden hour. Light washed over the water, transforming every ripple into a sparkling diamond. I took a deep, full breath of the cool, sweet air, feeling my lungs expand. I stood tall, my shoulders squared, my chin raised high. I was no longer the invisible wife. I was no longer the silent sufferer. I was the architect of my own destiny, the owner of my own home, and the master of my own peace. I looked into the golden horizon, a serene, proud, and triumphant smile lighting up my face. I was completely free. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. Please like, share, and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Hope to see you on the next page.